Welcome to If This Bar Could Talk, a podcast about bartenders and the stories they have to tell, as well as the storied history of cocktails, spirits, and bars. I'm Blair Beavers, and here's your host, Leanne Sims.
And our guest tonight is Logan Demmy from Citizens Trust here in Columbus, Ohio. Thanks for coming, Logan.
Thank you for having me.
So, Logan, you are like I'm going to call you the mad scientist of bartending because you've introduced us to some techniques that we have never seen before. And before we get to your techniques, I want to talk about your past. So, if I understand it right, you started out as a barista.
Yes, at Starbucks, actually.
Okay.
But then I worked in actual cafes in Cincinnati at Rose Street Cafe.
Okay.
Then in Columbus, I worked at Luck Brothers and Grandview, and I actually roasted for One Line for quite a while as well.
And then you worked at Mouton. Was that your first bartending gig?
Yeah, actually, I was working at Luck Brothers, and the person who was opening Mouton, Youssef, thought that he was going to have a coffee shop in the cocktail bar. And so I sold him one of my coffee grinders, and he hired me as a barista. And the idea of Mouton being a cafe just never panned out. And our bartender on a Friday didn't show up. And so I went from being a barista server to being the bartender.
Just like that? All right, so let's back up a little bit. What is your formal education?
Well, I've graduated from high school, as most, I guess, bartenders have. And then I went to the University of Cincinnati to study chemical engineering. And I worked as an environmental engineer in like a work studies. Then I transferred to OSU, and that's where I took the job at Luck Brothers and then the job at Mouton, and continued to study. And about 4.5 years into chemical engineering and a 5-year degree, I decided that that wasn't going to be for me.
Well, that explains a lot, though. Chemical engineering and your crazy techniques that you use. So you didn't know anything about bartending when you just switched gears from barista to bartender. You just how did you know how to do stuff?
Yeah, I mean, Mouton was really beautiful because it was supposed to be a wine bar, and then Youssef saw this book called the New York Cocktail Book. And he really loved the graphic design and thought that Ohio needed a craft cocktail bar, but no one knew how to bartend. So what he did is he took the pages of the craft cocktail book and put them on the wall. And so we could we could read the recipes off the wall as opposed to actually knowing them. So that was my first night bartending, was literally, someone ordered a South Side. And I'm like looking, where's the South? Oh, there it is. That's the Audrey Saunders method. I'm like, I can make a South Side now. Someone's ordered a Manhattan. There's a Manhattan on the wall. Someone's asked for, a pink lady. That's not on the wall. I was like, we can't make that.
So that's, and you're not that old. What are you, 25?
No, I'm 30.
Are you really?
Yeah.
You look like
so I took over Mouton when I was 21 to manage the bar, and it was myself and Matt McGrath, who I was living with. And basically, Youssef was there, and he was the wine-focused person, and he was creating the food boards, the cheeses, and the meats. And it was just Matt and I who were actually making the drinks. And, we were 21 and 24, maybe 22. Matt's not that much older than me either. And so we just, we didn't want to learn about wine. We wanted to learn about cocktails. Yeah. And so that's what we learned about.
That's kind of amazing. So the chemical engineering background explains your mad scientist stuff, but what about, you're really good at flavors? Where does that kind of, is that natural?
I mean, that's 100% coffee. When you walk into a coffee shop, and if you really trust the person making your coffee, then you know that person is, they've made a shot of espresso and they've tasted it and they've decided that, it's over extracted and it's bitter, or it's under extracted and it's sour, or, the extraction potential is wrong. And so they've done that with their palates. And they've changed it, and they've made multiple shots in the morning so that when you have your espresso at 8 a.m., it's not the first one that's been made. And so that really getting in tune with what you're making was something that I learned through coffee.
Wow.
Especially working with one line as a roaster, we would.
I was going to say not at Starbucks.
Not
That's
at
not
but,
how
but
they
Starbucks actually Starbucks teaches you, you do 1, 2, and 3. Like it's the order and the process in which you make what people need. And so Starbucks actually is really good for training people to kind of be that engineering idea. And going back to chemie, it's not so much about chemistry. It's more about how do you make the process make sense? Do you add part A, part B, or part C first? And, if part C is a lot faster, why don't you just make that, serve it, and then go back to part A? And so Starbucks taught me that.
That makes sense.
One line taught me how to taste. And, when I was roasting, we would get green coffee and we would kind of have like a flavor map of what we wanted it to be, but we really didn't know. And so we'd roast it in this very kind of rudimental way, like a cupping roast to a very low temperature. And we'd taste it through this process called cupping. And when you cup every day or every week, you have to, we have to have like a similar way to talk about things, because the way that I taste pepper is not the way that you taste pepper.
Right.
And so learning how we can all say that when we taste something, we say that this is pepper means that when we go forward, we know how to talk about our palates. And so coffee was the thing that really taught me to understand my palate and how to explain what I'm tasting in a way that you understood.
That's amazing. Okay, so you're at Mouton, you're 21, 22 years old, and then somehow you go to, is it Singapore? How did that happen?
Yeah, that was not a quick process. I was at Mouton in various capacities for 5 years, and it was at different stages. We went through an ownership change where Todd purchased the business. He really believed in the staff that was currently there when he purchased it and invested with us and really helped us travel. A lot of what he realized was that as bartenders in Columbus, we didn't make a ton of money. We weren't making what someone makes in New York or Chicago. And so kind of offsetting that by, either paying for travel or, giving us vacations so that we could travel. And so I think my biggest breakthrough was at Tales of the Cocktail. He paid for me to go the first year. The second year I was part of the CAP program, which was something that I think that Krista Levy, who's at M, who's been, very much, either in front of the scene star or behind the scene star of Columbus, really act as one of my first mentors. And she helped me become part of that first year as a CAP. I feel like that was the only way that...
And the CAP is Cocktail Apprentice Program.
Yeah, the Cocktail Apprentice Program. It's the group that makes all of the drinks at Tales of the Cocktail, which is probably the largest cocktail program in the U.S. Up to 15,000 people have attended.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that there's a larger attendance throughout the world. In terms of financial, maybe Berlin is a little bit bigger, but Tales is, it's on the map of if you wanted to be part of the scene, going to Tales is like that thing.
Yeah, and even if you're not a bartender, it's really fun to go.
We went a couple of years ago and absolutely enjoyed ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that, Tales isn't just about, being super geeky and only appealing to this certain subsect of craft cocktail bartenders. It brings people who are in a spectrum of the bartending industry, as well as also enthusiasts and, just, customers, which...
Big drinkers like us.
I'm speechless.
All right, so you're at Mouton, you go to CAP, you're a CAP, but how does that get you to overseas?
It's one of those like series of like unfortunate events. I met someone in 2013. She was just like this awesome force. I met her again in 2015, and I knew that at 2015 that I was looking for jobs outside of Columbus. I had applied to roles in, from New York to San Francisco, and I sent her my CV or resume. She was living in Singapore, and I was applying for what I thought was a job in Seoul, in Korea, to work for this really awesome bartender who had just left New York, Chris Lauder. And I didn't really hear back, and then I heard back, and they said, that role is not going to be for you. If you'd like to apply for the head bartender of this cocktail bar called 28 Hong Kong Street, we'll take your submission and we'll go through the interview process. So I had 2 interviews for it, and radio silence. I sat there and I was like, okay, sweet. Didn't get the job. I didn't really realize what 28 was. I Googled it and I learned about it. It had been voted Best International Cocktail Bar, Best International Bar Team at Tails. It was on the world's 50 best. And I just didn't know. And then all of a sudden I got a call, and it wasn't that I'd gotten the job. It was that I had another interview. And so I went through a personality test and
Personality test.
yeah.
That's smart.
I at this point, learning about the personality test, it wasn't necessarily about what your personality is. It was about learning how to integrate you into the existing team.
Okay, so not like how you interact with customers, but how you, okay, gotcha.
And I
Still smart.
would assume at this point that I already had the job, and they were just figuring out what the what the best way to bring me on board. And so I think like it was September 1, I got told that I got offered the job, and October 3rd, I was living in Singapore.
Wow.
And that was crazy.
Did they help you find a place to live, or did you just wing it?
I mean, I got paid to move, and I had help, and I was in Singapore working as the head bartender of possibly one of the most famous bars in the world. So I had financial capabilities of doing what I wanted to, but I had absolutely no clue what I was in for. And I spent 18 months there working for this, kind of every day is a Saturday. It's always full. We only have 70 seats, but we're pushing $2.5 million in cocktail sales, and it's one of these just like, wow. I don't know. I can't say. Am I allowed to curse?
Oh yes.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. So it was fucking hard. Like it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I didn't know what I was getting in for. I had media training. I had, I thought I was this amazing bartender who knew everything about spirits, and I walk into a bar that only has 500 bottles in the back bar, which in the global world is quite small, but I think 350 of them came from a different distillery. So, if we had Balvenie, we had one Balvenie that we supported, and that was the one that we liked, and we had to explain why we didn't carry a single other one of the Balvenies and what was the other product that fit into that spectrum. And then there's this whole list of rare spirits that I'd never seen because I lived in the U.S. And that exist outside of the U.S. So, a whole bunch of Scotch producers or bottling houses that I would just like. The learning curve was quite steep. I had help, and I thought it was amazing. I put out a really like crazy cocktail list. The person I worked with as my direct manager was from the U.S. And he was just one of those like prolific readers. He had seen everything, and when we went down to make cocktails, he's like, these are the ideas that I'm thinking about. And so it was really my job just to make sure that they worked and to be able to translate that to the staff that I worked with.
So did you learn some of the techniques that you have now there?
Yeah, that was the best part about being at 28 was that it wasn't money was no object, but it was, if this is the thing that tastes the best, that's how we're going to do it. And we're going to make it financially stable, so for a long time, our rye whiskey was Willet 2-year-old before it became Willet 3-year-old. In Singapore, that was about $100 a bottle.
Wow. And that was your well.
That was my well.
Wow.
It was, it was the product that we believed in most. It was a product that tastes best in old fashioned. So that's what we're going to do. Same thing.
Can't disagree.
No. But on the flip side, Four Roses Yellow Label, the one that was actually meant for export, was our well bourbon, and that was $40, and it wasn't actually available in Singapore. We bought it in pallets to bring to Singapore just for our bar. But that was the thing that we liked the most, and so it was about that, like that dichotomy. That's where I really fell in love with plantation, and the plantation products. What Alexander Gabriel with Maison Ferrand, like his real extreme approach to clarity or openness, or really just being honest about what's going into his products. That was one of my like first eye-opening experiences.
No marketing flamery.
I mean, there's marketing like for this one. It's plantation 3 stars, and 3 stars goes back to an old cognac system, but the 3 stars are Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad. Obviously, the 3 British colonies that produced rum back in the day.
And we're mentioning this because you're going to make us a cocktail in a little bit, and that's your main spirit. So you're in the most popular bar in Singapore. You're learning a lot of new techniques, and then why did you leave there?
Yeah, so like 28 was this like I said, juggernaut. I had a centrifuge, I had a slusher machine. While I was there, we were voted the 7th best bar in the world, the best bar in Asia. The second year, we were, I think, 11th or 14th in the world. But it was a very independent bar. And it operated on this very unique set of circumstances where it was basically the public-facing entity to a private company that did a lot of import-export and bar consult. And so I wanted to see the other side. I wanted to see either like a hotel or a marketing company and see how their budgets operated and how they would want to interact or support, the little guy. What's the point of, Pernod or Campari or Diageo investing in a bar that does a quarter of the sales of, the beer bar down the street, but that small bar, really brings to life the story of the spirits. So I started to interview for jobs, and I was offered kind of 2 jobs that I really wanted. I was offered a job in Singapore. Oh, sorry, it's not Singapore. A job in Shanghai as the brand ambassador for Remy Cointreau, looking after all of China. So national brand ambassador role for one of the largest countries in the world, one of the highest consumers of cognac, which Remy is very much so. And another job which was the brand ambassador for Pernod Ricard New Zealand. And, I interviewed with the teams. I went so far as actually to working in Shanghai for a week with the team to figure out if Shanghai was going to be okay. A lot of people look at Singapore as being kind of Asia light. The national language is English. It's fairly friendly to Westerners. And so, taking that next step and going way down the path of living in a country where people predominantly speak Mandarin or Cantonese, and having to do presentations that are translated, is a big difference. And I almost turned down the job in New Zealand, but at the last minute, I kind of decided that for me, especially for my mentality, that living in New Zealand would be better. So I took this role, working as an ambassador for all of the spirits. New Zealand's 4.5 million people. It's a third of the size of Ohio. It's twice the land mass of Ohio. So the population density is quite small. But I wanted to see what it was like to live in New Zealand. And I'd been there before, visiting once, and I kind of saw a lot of corollaries between the way that they approach life as well as Midwesterners do. So I felt like it would be just an easier lifestyle.
So when you were giving cocktail presentations and you had your interpreter, so that sounds like a really unique situation. So you were like, so you shake this cocktail and then you'd have to wait for the interpreter to say whatever.
Yeah. So the week that I did in Shanghai, I did presentations about 28 because I felt like that was the thing that I knew most about. To talk about what had made 28 amazing, what had drawn me from Midwest Ohio to Singapore. And so the translator I had was actually he's a very famous bartender. His name's Yao. He was opening a bar and he worked in the US, so he translated for me. I tried to make jokes, and clearly he interjected his own jokes in Mandarin where they made more sense, because I was like, there are people laughing and I didn't make a joke. So that was one of my big fears about going to Shanghai. And quite frankly, I think it was one of the best decisions I've ever made, moving to New Zealand as opposed to Shanghai.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. That's amazing experience. You've had so much experience in your young age. So where are you from Ohio originally, or?
Yeah, so I was born in Xenia. My father's side of the family is from Yellow Springs, kind of that
hippie artsy area where
Yeah.
Dave Chappelle lives.
Yeah, that's true. But his side of the family is more of like firefighters and police officers.
Oh,
So they
okay.
were the more conservative side of Yellow Springs.
My dad was a firefighter too.
And my mom's side of the family was from Southern Ohio, but she'd grown up in Grove City. So that's where I grew up. And
Okay.
I spent most of my time in Grove City before moving to Cincinnati, Columbus. I'd lived all of my life in Columbus or in Ohio until I was 26. And then, why not move to Singapore?
Why not? So you're in New Zealand. You're liking it. So what do you do after that?
So I was working as a brand ambassador, which is, it's about bringing the story of a brand to life. You've got these massive corporations with these huge budgets, but why does a bartender pour this brand over another brand? Or when you as a consumer, you walk into a bottle shop, why do you find this bottle to be more compelling than this bottle, besides what it says on the label? And so a lot of my job was to be able to tell that story, especially when you go into a liquor store and you're trying to buy vodka, or you're trying to buy rum, or you're trying to buy American whiskey. It's not 1 or 2 or 10. It's 30 or 40 or 100 options. And so it's about empowering the people who work for that shop to feel that they've tasted this product before. They met this person that was really nice, and they said that they should sell this product more than another one. And so I really love that, and it was exciting to take a completely different step outside of bartending. Especially in New Zealand, I got to interact with a lot of very young bartenders. People who had been bartending for 6 months or less, and to talk about why you're excited about how much ice you put into a glass, or how you shake a cocktail, why you shake a cocktail, why you stir a cocktail. To teach them about that more than teaching them about the brand, to empower them to be slightly better bartenders. How do you
That's cool.
really be hospitable? Why is it important that you smile or interact with your guest or ask them what they really want?
Is the craft cocktail scene, is it booming like it is here in the U.S. everywhere, or was it already booming? Or are we far behind? Or what?
New Zealand is very much a wine and beer market. They grow world-class wine. They started growing wine and really focusing about wine around the same time as Napa. They've been doing that for at least 60 years. But the spirits game is a little bit farther behind. I would say that there's a bit more money. Auckland has, it's not the capital, but it has 2 ports. And it's very much a kind of a condensed metropolis. I would compare Auckland or Wellington to about what's happening in Columbus. There's a little bit more wine and beer and especially food culture there, because they are in this really, high quality food establishment. So they do have that going for them. And I think that the craft cocktail movement and the craft beer market and the craft, even, going back to the quality wine, really is rooted with consumers thinking about what was happening with what they ate. Where you get out of the 50s and 60s and 70s of, the cheese in a can, and what you microwave to eat, and you start to think about where your food comes from, and that that specialty or slow food market starts happening in the U.S. in the 80s and 90s, around the same time that you start thinking about single malt whiskeys or aged bourbons, and so a lot of that, it's the consumers focusing on what they're eating translates to what they're drinking, and that really gives rise to especially as craft bartenders being able to give someone a $16 or $15 beverage that they could conceivably make at home.
Mm-hmm. So then, how did you come back to the States?
I just knew it was time. I've been gone for 3 years, and as much as I loved being abroad, I just knew that the U.S. has a lot of potential. It is the place where the cocktail was born. Mm-hmm. It might have been refined or improved in other countries, but this is its home. This is where I'm from.
The cocktail was born here, not in London?
I would say that New Orleans would be the the birthplace of the cocktail.
Okay.
American bartenders.
With the Sazerac?
David Wondrich would say that was incorrect.
Okay. What would he say?
He would say the bitter whiskey skin, kind of that just bitters whiskey and water. maybe a little bit of sugar would be the original cocktail.
Okay.
That's definitely that individualistic idea of consumption is, I think, much more American.
Yeah.
If I think about London, I think about punch, and I think about consuming as a group. And maybe we can, draw a correlate to our economies. And America is definitely much more about the self, the individual, whereas maybe socialist countries are a little bit more about the group. So I don't know, some corollaries between drinking and economy.
Could be.
But I definitely think that I feel like the cocktail was born here. Unfortunately, we had Prohibition in the 1920s, demonized this profession, and sent a lot of those people abroad. And that might have even made cocktails much better, because you condense some of the greatest talents. They moved to London, they moved to Paris, they moved to Southeast Asia, and suddenly all of these people in the US who are living in this massive country and never interacting are now working at the same bar. Harry's in Paris. There's these places that become iconic. The Savoy, American bar, and that's where that next big boom after the golden age of the cocktail happens.
So they bring all those flavors and stuff back here. So yeah,
and professionalism. I know that Europe has rubbed off on me a bit. I think it's crazy that people don't bartend in aprons or ties. But I'm also personally, I love bartending in a t-shirt, and I would love to be able to own a bar that I could make you a $15 Manhattan and a t-shirt, and then serve the next person a PBR. But that's personal as opposed to what I currently represent, which is
So currently you're at Citizens Trust, which is an absolutely beautiful bar. It's a old bank, the old Ohio National or Citizens Trust, then purchased by Ohio National Bank. But you're in a beautiful space. It's massive though. Yeah. And you guys did an event over Christmas. What is it called? The Miracle?
Yeah, we did the Miracle pop-up. Yeah. And I think we are blessed. I unabashedly would say that I think we have the most beautiful bar in Columbus.
Oh, for sure.
We've got 30-foot ceilings, these beautiful pillars, a very ornate ceiling, and we're in a 6,000-foot lobby. So it's I think we're quite lucky with that.
It's very beautiful. If you haven't been there, listeners, definitely get there. It's at the corner of Gay and High in Columbus, Ohio. It's a beautiful, beautiful space.
And
I love
it's an
how
extension of Veritas restaurant, correct?
Yeah. And that's the cool thing. You're talking about science. We kind of left that a while ago, but we're a cocktail bar in a lobby, but we have the same tools and techniques that exist at Veritas. In Singapore, I learned about centrifuges and distillation and rotovaps. All of these kind of very rotovaps or rotary evaporator.
Okay.
It's a technique for distilling at reduced temperature and reduced pressure.
Okay.
Now, of course, we avoid alcohol. We're making hydrosols where we're distilling vinegars or waters. But we have the same tools and techniques. I go downstairs to Aaron, who's the kind of the chef at Veritas for day to day, and I say, hey, I want to thicken this syrup. What should I use? And he's like, I've got Ultratex 8. And I was like, oh, cool, sweet. It's this random number, something from Modernist Panchi, or I want to create a sorbet, or I want to make a foam, and all of these things. There's this is the percentage that we use downstairs to make this, this sauce or this foam, and instead of me having to do all of that legwork, there's this really, really intelligent kitchen below. At the same point, we're it's a tasting menu restaurant, that's putting out 3, 6, and 9 course menus right now. And so I say, I want this random leaf, or what's the vegetable supplier giving us this week that I can use for upstairs. And we have just access to be able to grab random flavors that I haven't ever had the opportunity to really interact with before.
That's fun.
Yeah. And that culinary side is really cool. Mm-hmm. And I do think that we're a much different style establishment than Veritas. Veritas is 70 seats at most, and it's very intimate, and it's quite controlled. And we're in this 6,000 square foot, lobby bar, and sometimes things can get a little bit on the outside of control. So we can't necessarily offer that, that 12-course tasting experience where you're going to have a very quiet, intimate experience with the person next to you. You might get bumped by someone who's also enjoying a cocktail. And so that's why I love that kind of that organized chaos. 28 in Singapore was very much that. It was the bar that you could go to on a Tuesday and spend $500 on a bottle of champagne and have this really intimate experience. And then on Friday, a bartender might be walking down the bar pouring shots. It's one of those, like that dichotomy. And I feel like that exists very much between Veritas and Citizens, where if you want that really amazing, that curated food experience, Veritas can be that first bit, and then you can finish up with a little bit more of a relaxed cocktail upstairs.
That's good advice. I would say before and after.
Yeah, it could go the other way too. You could pregame upstairs at Citizens Trust.
I would say do both. But so the miracle thing that you did, I actually heard about that. I was listening to a podcast called Speakeasy, and they were talking about that, and it sounds pretty crazy. So what in the world made you? First of all, were you the only bar in Columbus to do that?
So Miracle is a concept that was created by Greg Boehm and Nico De Soto, two New York legends. I might have Greg's last name wrong. I'm not super great at the pronouncing. But Greg is one of the co-founders of Cocktail Kingdom, which provides really amazing bar tools and bitters and books and glassware. And Nico, who is a French bartender, but had spent quite a bit of time in the U.S., and they opened a bar together. It's known as Mace. I think it actually, they closed this week, and they're reopening a different location, which is kind of crazy. But when they first went to start to open the bar, when every bar opens, it's not a week behind schedule. It's 6 weeks or 8 weeks behind schedule. And
right.
that's really great if you open your bar within 6 weeks. So what they were struggling to open before Christmas, and they weren't able to do it. And so instead of opening an unfinished bar in November, or opening a finished bar in January, they decided to cover everything in wrapping paper and do a Christmas themed pop-up. And that happened, I think, in 2014. And that was the first Miracle bar. And so they had this really successful launch, and then people around the US started asking to be able to do the same thing. And so they then licensed the product. And so they offer one per city to be able to buy into the Miracle concept.
Oh, okay.
I think there were 2 in Chicago and 2 in New York, but everywhere else you could just have one. And they curate a cocktail menu, and they get really cool glassware, and they help you with kind of the theming and idea. But at the end of the day, it's really up to you to be able to create a Christmas bar.
Okay. And did you know that it was going to be that popular and that insane? Because you were slammed every night.
Yeah, I mean, I'd only worked at the bar for 3 months at this point, and I knew that we were going to be busy, and I had prepared for that. And I was really, working with the CAP program, I understand the concept of batching and how you can make your bar more efficient. And I really thought that I had it. And, it was every week was just trying to be able to make more cocktails. And, we did this astronomical amount of sales, and we made an astronomical amount of cocktails too, because we were 100% cocktails at this point. And, we only have had so much space to make drinks. So, it's not that we magically had, 4 stations to make drinks for the 125 people in our bar that were asking for drinks that had 7 and 8 ingredients. It was that we still had two wells to make drinks, and we were just, kind of flying by the seat of our pants. I thought it was a really cool experience. I think I have the strongest bar team in the city to be able to turn that around.
There was the Miracle.
That's the Miracle. And so, we signed on really late. It was supposed to be held somewhere else, and that bar fell through. And so it was offered to me by a dear friend, and she said, like, I can't do this concept. If you want to try to do it, it's there for you. We've already set up all the paperwork, and we've got it nearly there. And so 3 weeks before this insanity, I signed on to the bar idea. Wow. But most other bars had signed on in July. So they'd been planning for 6 months for this insanity. And, I just signed on to a new bar, and it was my job to like bring it back up and make it profitable. And now I'm not just talking about profitable. It's basically, we made as many drinks as I could batch. And in the 700 to 800 on
wow
a Saturday, which is, I don't know, for 2 bartenders.
That's insane.
Not an appropriate number.
So tell me the names of some of the cocktails that you had.
Well, I think the Cosmopolitan will just never go away. It's a vodka kind of Cosmopolitan, little Saint Germain, rosemary, absinthe. It's like really insane cranberry syrup, but it wasn't like, it wasn't highbrow cranberry syrup. It was made with, the canned cranberry sauce and, ocean spray cranberry cocktail. We had the Jingle Balls Nog. There's the
that was actually really delicious.
That was really good. Yippee-ki-yay motherfucker, or yippee-ki-yay mother F snowflake ER. I thought we were going to sell more of those, but apparently
I would have bought that.
Apparently people aren't a fan of Die Hard.
No, of course they are.
Yeah, of course they are.
That's like the best. It's a Christmas movie.
Wow. There's
totally
definitely there's a line, of people who think that Die Hard's a Christmas movie, and people who are just not human. Right.
That's so funny. But you made it through, and now you're on the other side of that. I did not make it to your place for that. Blair did, and he was like, wow, I've never seen so many people at that bar at one time. But you guys apparently you even did our cocktail tour during that mayhem, and everybody was happy. So
yeah,
I guess it worked out well.
No complaints. Everybody was very happy.
Yeah. Nightmares. I still dream about it.
All right, Logan. So this is a point in our program where we're going to take a break, and you're going to make us a cocktail. What are you going to make us tonight?
I'm going to make you just a plain daiquiri.
My favorite.
I think a lot of times, I've traveled quite a bit, and, you meet bartenders from around the world, and a lot can be said about how someone chooses to make just a really simple 3-ingredient drink. I'm going to make it from someone who I got to work with a bit in Singapore, who I don't think realized how much they impacted how I changed how I make daiquiris, based on kind of their approach. He's a very well-respected bartender named David Cordoba. He worked for kind of one of the larger rum companies as a global brand ambassador, and he's actually launched his own rum, which I really want to try at some point. But he had this very specific way of making a daiquiri that I'm going to try to recreate.
Awesome. I can't wait.
Can't wait.
So we'll
Awesome.
We'll take a break, make a cocktail, and we'll come back, and you'll tell us all about your technique. And we are back with Logan's daiquiri. So
Cheers.
this looks great. Cheers, guys. I'm excited. So the daiquiri is one of my favorite drinks. The Hemingway is my all-time favorite, but I love a daiquiri, so I'm excited to taste this one.
Do you like yours a little bit sweeter?
A
It's
little
delicious.
tart. I like them a little bit tart. That is so good. So here's the funny thing. I had always thought that a daiquiri meant a blender and like a slushy type thing. But once I learned what a real daiquiri was, it's one of my all-time favorite drinks. So tell us how you made this.
Yeah, so I think, the daiquiri's got a really long history. I think probably it was originally made with lemons as opposed to limes. very much a Cuban classic. And sadly, I've never been to Cuba, as a good American citizen. No, yeah. But the citrus there is quite different, and the citrus in Singapore, the citrus in New Zealand, like they always taste different. But the beauty of a daiquiri is it's a balance between, a really well-crafted, I think, white rum, but maybe aged, citrus and sugar. And so for this one, instead of using a simple syrup, which would be well integrated, I kind of made a faux simple syrup with the lime and the sugar, and using actual, a castor sugar or a fine white sugar. And part of what that did was allowed me to shake it a bit longer. If you hear the audio, instead of shaking for that, 10 or 15 seconds, it's a lot closer to that 25 or 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And when you pour the daiquiri, you get this audible, all of the oxygen that you've incorporated. And I feel like those little bits of granulated sugar that still are there help to create this really wonderful foamy head. And so you can audibly hear that. It gives you the opportunity to kind of assess how much sugar to use per lemon. So David, who made these, is a very big sweet tooth. So he would have used at least a spoonful of sugar more each. Or like that kind of American style daiquiri. It's a little bit more tangy, a little bit more refreshing.
I prefer this too. Yeah. And I noticed you stirred the sugar with the lime before you added the rum.
Right. So sugar and alcohol don't mix. They really don't like to. If you've ever tried to pour sugar into straight whiskey, it will never kind of come into a solution. The lime juice doesn't have the alcohol, so it's a little bit easier to start integrating that sugar into the lime juice. I used a bar spoon. A really, I think, proper technique would probably use a little bit more of a whisk, something where you could start aerating that lime juice a little bit, bringing those two things together. I don't think they're completely mixed. In the bottom of the shaker, there's probably a little bit of sugar left
There's
over.
no granules in my drink, though.
No, but there's something textural that isn't just simple syrup. You can feel that. Not in a bad way, just it's sugar.
To be honest,
I can't feel it.
Your ice might have worked really well for it. If I was, at, craft cocktail bar where we've got, Hoshizaki or cold draft, like these big 1-inch cubes, I would have actually put crushed ice on top of the shaker tin. So, you fill it mostly with these large, beautiful cubes that everyone knows, and then just a little bit of crushed ice. So you actually fill the shaker tin. David would have used, a 3-piece kind of Japanese cobbler shaker. Those like really beautiful, like that 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1. If you've ever seen a Japanese bartender with their much shorter shakers, but I'm not so skilled. I feel much more at home with my 2-piece.
I would say you're pretty skilled. So you use the what is this? Plantation 3-star rum, and then granulated sugar in your lime juice.
It's just so simple.
Yeah, I love that.
And I really think that, with the number of ingredients comes complexity. You can put 8 ingredients in a cocktail and it's going to be complex. It's going to have lots of layers of flavor because you've put 8 ingredients in. That ability to be able to balance, a much shorter ingredient list, a 3 or a 4 or a 5 ingredient cocktail is much more difficult, and it's much more nuanced. It's, understanding how sour your limes are. Mm-hmm. In Singapore, we were looking at the pH content or the sugar content of our citrus because we had such varying degrees. Not all limes taste the same. In the U.S., you can see key limes, or you can see, the Parisian lime.
I have no idea.
My brain's
The
gone right
regular lime.
The limes, the larger limes, you get that like coconutty, like aromatic from the larger limes. The key limes are this really intense malic sour. But in a lot of other places, your limes have this wide variety, and so it's about being able to understand, how sour your limes are today, or how much sugar content is them, and to be able to say that you don't always put those 4 full scoops of sugar. Sometimes you put 3.
Yeah.
Or instead of putting a half ounce, you put 3/4 ounce. Or, for me, it's become, 15 mils or 20 mils, and thinking about cocktails in a completely different spectrum.
So, as I said, you use a lot of crazy techniques. I guess not crazy to people in the industry, but crazy to me, the person who just enjoys cocktails. One of the techniques that you guys employ at Citizens Trust, I don't know if you still do, but I know you did in the beginning, was something called milk washing or washing. How does...
Yeah, I was actually, I was really on the fence because today I'm working on the next menu, and we're going to have both clarified coconut milk and milk washed gin punch on the next menu. And so I was like, do I want to bring the daiquiri, this thing that I know that I trust and I really care about, or do I want to bring this kind of like fat washed flavor profile? And at the end of the day, I love the idea of fat washing.
What does that mean?
Fat washing and milk washing a little bit different, but basically with a clarified milk punch, you're taking something that has a protein and a fat structure, and you're mixing it in with alcohol, and then you're adding some type of citrus element that's causing the fat to break. So if you know about cheese making, you know about curds and whey. It's about creating these fat curds that attach to compounds that just aren't in the milk. Some of them might be in the cocktail themselves. If you put black tea or if you put a red wine, they'll actually bond with some of those, like those tannic acid or those things that are slightly more bitter, and they'll pull them out. And really beautiful milk wash will create. We'll take a cocktail that might be cloudy or it might be brown, it might be red, it might be yellow, and it will make it clear. And it's not necessarily straining through a filter pad. It's actually straining through the curds that you create. And when you do a milk wash punch, you get this really beautiful textural element and body from all the proteins that are found in the milk, but you'll also pull out some of the bitter aspects. So I think the milk wash punch that you tried before was gin, black tea, pineapple, lemon peel, and maybe I think it was white wine. And when I made the black tea, if you've ever made tea at home, if you put a tea bag in boiling water and you let it sit there for 10 or 15 minutes and you try to drink that tea, it's just incredibly bitter. It's unpleasant. Mm-hmm. It's not something you want to drink. And what the milk washing will do is it will bind to all those extra tannins, those like really drying elements you get at the back of your palate, and they'll pull them out, and you'll be left with the sweeter elements of the tea. And so it's a really old technique, going back to that idea of London and punch. The milk washed punch goes well before the cocktail. It's in the late 17 or mid 1700s. It's almost 250 years old at this point. So it's not a technique that is new, but it's one of those that's been brought back on using alternative fats like coconut milk or a little bit more nouveau. But I think I learned a lot about that. There was a Camper English article. Camper runs Alcademics. He's a blogger out of San Francisco, and he really delves into topics and gets really geeky about them. He's the first person that I read about clarified ice in a cooler. He's the person that he's just launched a new article called Cocktail Safe. It's cocktailsafe.org, and it's about thinking about the things that we put in cocktails and assessing if they're actually food safe or not food safe. Something like activated charcoal is not a food ingredient by the FDA, but you see it used a lot of times to make burgers black or cocktails black. But it's not technically a food additive. It's not legal to put into food. Mm-hmm. Or making your own tonic water or your own tonic syrup, quinine or quinine, depending on which side of the ocean you're on, is a really strong drug, and it can have quite adverse effects if you don't know what the actual content is in the cinchona bark. So he's the person that I've found a lot of this information about, and he just writes these really in-depth articles that seem to be rooted in science, but also still from not 100% professional.
I love that something, it sounds so complicated, but it came from back in the, probably 1800s, early 1800s, just like the craft cocktails that we enjoy today. These are all things that are being brought back from those early pre-prohibition time. It's just so crazy to me that and back then the bartenders were rock stars and they were the chefs of the cocktail glass. It's just, I'm so glad that all that stuff is coming back. It's
and that
really
we have
amazing.
some great talented people in our town that are geeky enough to want to bring them back. No offense. Like, I mean that in the best of ways.
But isn't that? I mean, that's the question that I am dealt with every day: is what's next? How are we going to continue to modify our industry? That was the beauty of 28 Hong Kong Street in Singapore, is that it started as this like back alley speakeasy that no one knew where the entrance was, and became this very popular bar. And the interior was renovated 3 times in 6 years, and the cocktail list every year. It kept modifying itself to be current with the times, and I think that's what the bars that have stayed in that World's 50 Best list have done. So what are we doing now as contemporaries thinking about the CrossFit and health movement? How are we adapting to being part of that, or are we choosing not to? Are we deciding that we believe that cocktails are an indulgence and that they need to stay at that certain level, or do we need to start reducing the sugar and reducing the alcohol to kind of think of the health vibe?
I think you're going to figure it out. I think you're going to keep us on our toes here in Columbus, Ohio. We truly appreciate that. So you're a world traveler. You've worked at many different bars, so you got to have a story or two to tell. What's your best bar story? No, you don't have to tell me names.
It's R-rated.
Yeah, I can't
It
take.
can be
I was
whatever.
I'm like,
No names.
What was the craziest thing that happened to you in Singapore or Shanghai or New
Singapore
Zealand?
is one of those places that the craziest things don't happen in Singapore. They happen in Thailand, or they happen in London. It's like, oh. Even without names, some of these stories are just like best kept. I did a pop-up in a bar in London with a very famous bartender, Zdenek. And Z kind of was dragging me along to this event that he'd been invited for. And we stayed in the Shangri-La in London, in the Shard.
Is that a real place?
Yeah, Shangri-La is a hotel chain. They're 7-star hotels.
I thought that was just a song,
Yeah.
70s song. I didn't.
Well, there's that too.
Okay.
That's different.
Sorry, continue.
And oh man, how do I put this in a way that no one gets in trouble? So we basically we were representing 28 Hong Kong Street in London, and this pop-up was supposed to be 2 days, and it was supposed to be real chill, like 3-hour bar shifts. And it turned into 5 days, and each one was 5 hours. So all of the prep we did on the first day was done on the first day, and none of the things that we had brought from Singapore existed. And the last night that we were there, we kind of just started putting stickers all over this other person's bar. These like little like heart-shaped 28 stickers. I just remember waking up in my hotel room in the Shangri-La with a bottle of champagne in the bathtub.
You woke up in the bathtub. Was the champagne bottle empty?
Yeah, it was. And nothing had any clothes on. And I don't remember exactly what happened in the Shangri-La, but I know that I didn't leave.
I think that's how the song goes.
You say that as if you weren't alone.
Oh, well, the best part was I was sharing the room with Z, who is just a good mate. And honestly, like nothing did happen, but we ended up going to a couple of different bars in the Shard, which is this super ritzy hotel. And I feel like at every establishment we like chugged a bottle of champagne, And at some point, like I just ended up and I was like, I'm just going to take a bath. And that's how I woke up like 8 hours later in a bathtub with a bottle of champagne in hand. Luckily, I survived that.
Wait, so there was water in the bathtub?
Yeah, there was. Yeah.
So were you freezing your ass off? Was it like cold as shit?
Spot. No, I don't remember.
You didn't feel it.
No. On the same night, the night before, someone in a taxi had I fell asleep in a taxi apparently, and someone borrowed my phone and called my girlfriend and told her that we were getting strippers and going back to the hotel room, and I never knew that happened because I woke up the next day to a lot of angry text messages.
That's not a nice friend.
He was actually the global ambassador for Monkey Shoulder. He's an amazing person.
Oh, that's funny. So are you happy to be back here in Columbus?
Yeah, I actually really struggled with that for a second. I didn't realize how hard it had been living overseas, in terms of like a mental and physical. Like we work in one of the possibly most taxing industries in the world, and there's not the access to kind of the healthcare that we need a lot of times. And living abroad had been this like amazing journey, and it was like go for 3 years. And I don't know how many countries that I traveled to or how many 24-hour flights that I took. But I had this like this dream vacation that a lot of people would think about, and then coming home has like I've been happier than I ever thought I would be. And I still to this day I can't put a reason to it. Like it might just be the routine that I'm in, like that I'm like slowing down for a second. But Columbus is home. I don't know. I don't think it's where I'm going to stay for now. I've lived in 24-hour cities or cities that have that feeling, and I still feel a little bit too young to be in a city that closes at 11 p.m. But there are people who are excited, and there are people that are working really hard, and there are people that are driving the industry. And there's a lot of opportunity to be able to present something new, even not just to the U.S., but to the Midwest that doesn't exist in some of the bigger markets. And I really enjoy that about Columbus. Mm-hmm. And it's not easy. We're a control state. We've got a select list of products that we can use. But we don't necessarily have to have 1,000 different colors to paint a beautiful portrait. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's just the primary colors. It's being able to use the things that are readily available to say that this $17 bottle of rum is the one that I really believe in and that I can make great things with. And sometimes it might be harder to do that than if you have 40 different products to be able to juxtapose. Totally
agree. And so well said, Logan Demmy. Thank you. We're welcome home, and we're very happy that you're back, and we hope that you stay forever because we need you to show us new things and new techniques. And I know you're going to figure out how to keep this industry exciting and new. And thank you for being our guest. It was a pleasure. When you say, Blair, did you like your daiquiri?
Oh, absolutely.
You're not a rum guy.
No, but this was a great cocktail. Delicious.
Was it too
simple,
sweet?
But
No. Just
simple
perfect?
And delicious. Yeah.
How about you, Hansberry?
It's just right.
Yeah, it's just really well balanced.
To your point, you can tell the difference between the granular and the simple syrup, and I like it.
Yeah.
I feel like I can see it, but I can't feel it on my tongue, and it doesn't taste.
I don't feel grains on my tongue. I just feel a different viscosity than if simple were in it.
It's not necessarily that. It's just that you're not adding dilution with the simple syrup.
Yes.
If you put a half an ounce of simple syrup into a cocktail,
that's a quarter.
A quarter of that is water. And so you're not adding that quarter of water, so you're allowing the rum to be a little bit more predominant in the overall flavor profile.
So you're very sensitive to water. I can't remember what we were doing, but I was chilling glasses with water, and you had said, I don't actually like to do that because it's adding water.
Yeah. I think that's a real debate.
Well, it's an ingredient.
It is, yeah. And so if you're putting ice in a glass and you're adding dilution and you're not wiping the glass dry afterwards, then you're adding dilution that you weren't accounting for when you shook the cocktail. If you're taking a glass out of the freezer or out of the fridge, it's already reduced in temperature, so you're not necessarily warming the drink up.
Yeah.
With dilution, though, you're not talking about the change in temperature. You're talking about a change in state. Dilution is changing solid water to liquid water, and that's where that energy is. And that's orders of magnitude larger than changing water from 32 degrees to 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
You see, this is why I think we have the best bartenders in the freaking world right here. Did you hear that? So listeners, definitely get to Citizens Trust to visit Logan. It's an amazing bar, not only for their cocktails, but for the decor.
And the rest of his staff.
Oh, yeah.
All the staff over there is really, really top notch.
Yeah, they're all really, really wonderful. Also, thanks to our producer, Greg Hansberry. Thank you very much. And thanks to our original music by the biographer. Check out our website at ColumbusCraftCocktailTour.com for events. And follow us on Instagram at, what's our Instagram?
C-Bus Craft Cocktail Tour.
And you can also follow us on Facebook. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and rate us and review us on SoundCloud, if you please. That really helps us out.
Always remember to drink responsibly, tip appropriately, and be cocktail curious.
Cheers.
Cheers.